my skin.
Here is something the music industry does not want you to think about too hard. When a record does not sell, the label moves on. They stop promoting. They stop pressing copies. They let the artist go. And the music sits. But the music doesn't know it failed. The groove doesn't care what the SoundScan numbers say. The drum break doesn't know it never got radio play. So when a producer in the late 1980s sat down at a sampler with a milk crate of vinyl, they weren't looking for hits. They were looking for texture, for rhythm, for feeling. And what they kept finding buried under a decade of commercial failure was genius. These are the 12 albums that proved it.
Like a child stealing his first piece of candy and got caught.
Number 1, M-Tomb, Juicy Fruit, 1983. Nobody at Epic Records thought this album had legs. The single Juicy Fruit hit number 1 on the R&B chart in June 1983. And stayed there for 8 weeks. But on the pop chart, where the real commercial money lived, it barely cracked the top 50. The album sold moderately, then faded, then disappeared. James M. Tomb, a Philadelphia-born percussionist who had played with Miles Davis, had built an album around what he called sophisti-funk, drum machines, warm synth pads, sparse, hypnotic grooves. It sounded like nothing else on the market in 1983, which is exactly why it didn't sell. The way Epic hoped. Then 1994 arrived. And a kid from Brooklyn named Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious B.I.G., walked into a session with Sean Combs. Combs pulled out a crumpled copy of the M-Tomb album and played Juicy Fruit in the instrumental mix and built an entire life story over its groove. Juicy, Biggie's debut single from Ready to Die, became one of the most celebrated hip-hop songs ever made. Rolling Stone ranked it number 32 on the 500 greatest songs of all time, and M-Tomb himself sat down with Puff Daddy to work out the royalty deal personally. He later said of that meeting, "Puff told me you get $1, I get 50 cents. Why was that deep? Because back then, a lot of the cats who created the music weren't getting paid at all." M-Tomb's Juicy Fruit has been sampled over 70 times. An album that nearly vanished in 1983 became one of the most financially powerful R&B records of the decade, just 11 years too late. Number 2, the Isley Brothers, Between the Sheets, 1983. They made this album because they were desperate. 2 consecutive Isley Brothers albums, Inside You and The Real Deal,
Oh, baby girl, just cling to me and let your mind.
Had both flopped commercially. No hit singles. Disappointing sales. The group's momentum from their 1970s run was evaporating fast. So in late 1982, they went back into Bearsville Studios. Chris Jasper, Ernie Isley, and Marvin Isley stripped everything back.
Girl, what's your fantasy?
And wrote a different kind of slow jam one inspired directly by Marvin Gaye's Sexual Healing. That song was the title track, Between the Sheets. It was a lush, quiet storm groove, elegant, unhurried, built entirely on feel. When released in 1983, the album returned them to the top of the R&B album chart. But Between the Sheets, as a single, did not chart on the Billboard Hot 100. Not even close. It landed at number 52 in the UK. That was it. A decade later, producers started digging, and what they found in that groove was irresistible. Biggie sampled it for Big Papa. Jay-Z sampled it for Ignorant Shant. Gwen Stefani used it on Luxurious. Dabrat used it on Funk Daffyd. Aaliyah used it on Old School. Whitney Houston used it on One of Those Days. Between the Sheets has been sampled over 168 confirmed times. An album the Isley Brothers made out of desperation became one of the most reproduced grooves in the history of recorded music. Number 3. Bobby Caldwell, What You Won't Do for Love, 1978. The record label hid his face on purpose. Bobby Caldwell was a white musician from Miami who sounded entirely like a black R&B singer from the South. When he signed with TK Records in 1978, a label whose audience was predominantly African American, the executives made a calculated decision. They kept his face off the album cover, entirely in shadow. No photograph, no image, just the music, because they knew.
Made me do for love what I would not.
If you heard Bobby Caldwell before you saw Bobby Caldwell, you would be a fan. And when he toured with Natalie Cole and audiences finally saw him walk out on stage, they already loved the song too much to walk away. That song was What You Won't Do for Love. It hit number 9 on the pop chart and number 6 on the R&B chart. And then Caldwell disappeared. His follow-up albums didn't connect. His label shut down. He quietly shifted to playing American standards. Then the Crate Diggers found him. Tupac sampled What You Won't Do for Love for Do for Love. Biggie's team sampled his track My Flame for Sky's the Limit. Common sampled Open Your Eyes for The Light, a Grammy-nominated single.
I came back to let you know.
Chance the Rapper slid into Caldwell's DMs personally to ask permission. Caldwell wrote back, "I'll be honored if you sample my song." Chance later said he had never been thanked for sampling a song before, and that he had not felt that kind of grief at a stranger's passing since Caldwell died in March 2023. Questlove said on Instagram after his death,
Do for love.
Caldwell was the closing chapter in a generation where record execs wanted to hide faces on album covers, so perhaps their artist could have a chance. One album, a hidden face, and a legacy that kept paying for decades.
But you don't give up. In my way.
Number 4. Zapp, 1980. They came from a 2-bedroom house in Hamilton, Ohio. 10 kids, 1 bathroom, and a robot voice that would change hip-hop forever. Roger Troutman and his brothers, discovered by Bootsy Collins and co-signed by George Clinton, released their debut album in the summer of 1980. It went gold within 4 months, but that was as good as it got for a while. By the time Zapp 4 dropped in 1985, sales were falling. Their sound, built on the talkbox, heavy funk bass lines, and robotic futurism, wasn't connecting with mainstream pop audiences the way it once had. Zapp V in 1989 failed to even receive RIAA certification. The group was fading. Then the West Coast happened. Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg were building a sound slow, cinematic, de sun-baked G-funk, and they kept going back to one record. More bounce to the ounce from Zapp's 1980 debut. That bass line became the spine of an entire subgenre. Ice Cube said that More Bounce to the Ounce introduced him to hip-hop. More Bounce has been sampled over 200 times, and by 1995, Roger Troutman wasn't just being sampled, he was being called directly. Tupac Shakur asked him to play Live Talkbox on California Love. It went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, sold over 2 million copies. An album that couldn't get certified platinum in 1985 finally got there in 1994 through a compilation, 9 years after release. Roger Troutman was shot and killed by his brother Larry in April 1999, a murder-suicide outside their family studio in Dayton, Ohio. He never fully saw what his sound had built, but his hometown of Hamilton, Ohio, renamed the street he grew up on in his honor in 2024. The 2-bedroom house, 1 bathroom, a robot voice that outlived everything. Number 5. Leon Haywood, Come and Get Yourself Some, 1975. He played piano for Sam Cooke. He charted 20 R&B singles over 3 decades. And he made one record, one album, that the world mostly forgot about. Until Dr. Dre pressed play. Leon Haywood's 1975 album, Come and Get Yourself Some, contained a track called I Want to Do Something Freaky to You. It was a slow, seductive, mid-tempo funk instrumental. The kind of song that worked better as mood music than as a radio single. It hit number 7 on the R&B chart and number 15 on the pop chart. Modest, respectable. Then the album faded. Haywood kept recording through the 1970s and 1980s, scoring occasional R&B hits, including the UK top 20 single Don't Push It, Don't Force It. In 1980, but the mainstream never fully embraced him. Then 1992 arrived, and Dr. Dre's The Chronic arrived with it. Nothing But a G Thing sampled Leon Haywood's groove wall to wall. The bass line, the feel, the temperature of the whole track. That song became one of the defining sounds of the decade. Rolling Stone has it on their 500 greatest songs list. Chuck D of Public Enemy said it single-handedly. Took hip-hop from the crack era to the weed era. Leon Haywood died in April 2016 at age 74. In his final years, the royalty checks from Nothing But a G Thing and dozens of other samples kept coming in. He never became a superstar, but he made one groove so perfect that one of the greatest producers alive built a masterpiece on top of it. Number 6. Syl Johnson, Dresses Too Short, 1968. He called himself a multifaceted genius. He also called himself the most sampled artist in hip-hop history. He wasn't wrong on either count. Syl Johnson, born Sylvester Thompson in Holly Springs, Mississippi, built a catalog of Chicago soul and blues records in the late 1960s that nobody outside the community particularly noticed. His 1968 debut album, Dresses Too Short, contained a track called Different Strokes. It opens with Johnson's deep grunting vocals, a snapping snare, and the girlish laughing of a young singer named Minnie Riperton, the same Minnie Riperton who would later record Lovin' You. That combination, raw, gritty, strange, became one of the most powerful drum breaks in hip-hop history. Public Enemy used it on Fight the Power, arguably the most important protest song of the last 40 years. Wu-Tang Clan used it on Shame on a Nigga, NWA used it, De La Soul used it, Kanye West and Jay-Z used it on The Joy, and Johnson sued them for it. He also sued Cypress Hill for $29 million. Johnson won, he settled, and the royalties came. By 2010, he told the New York Times, I'm sitting in the house that Wu-Tang built with their money. His daughter sent neighborhood kids out with cassette tapes telling them, if you find my dad's wow and his awe on any rap record, he will pay you for it. Different Strokes has been sampled over 300 times. Syl Johnson died in February 2022 at age 85. His family described him as a fiery, a fierce fighter, always standing for the pursuit of justice as it related to his music. He made his opportunities, and then he fought for every dollar they were worth. Number 7. The Gap Band, Gap Band 4, 1982. The Gap Band were one of the biggest funk acts of the early 1980s. Their albums sold, their singles charted. They had a fan base, But Gap Band 4, released in 1982, contained a specific track that nobody thought much about at the time. It was called Yearning for Your Love, a slow jam, gentle, almost fragile. And underneath it was a bass line and a chord change so warm, so perfectly constructed, that producers would spend the next 2 decades trying to recreate the feeling it created. They couldn't recreate it. So they sampled it. Yearning for Your Love has been sampled by Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube, DJ Quick, Thaw Dog Pound, and dozens of other artists throughout the 1990s West Coast scene. While another track from the same album, Outstanding, became one of the most recognizable slow jam samples in the history of R&B, used by everyone from Mary J. Blige to modern neo-soul producers still flipping it today. Gap Band 4 was a solid commercial album, but it became something more than that, a quarry. A source, a place producers kept going back to whenever they needed something real. Charlie Wilson, the lead voice of the Gap Band, would go on to a celebrated solo career and become one of the most featured artists in hip-hop history. But it started here, in an album from 1982 that most people couldn't name if you asked them. Number 8. Tina Marie, Irons in the Fire, 1980. She was a white woman signed to Motown Records, the only white artist Berry Gordy had ever signed to his label.
I am your Piscean holocaust.
And her label handled her exactly like Bobby Caldwell's label handled him. They kept her face off the album cover. Her 1979 debut album had Tina Marie standing in shadow, just like Bobby Caldwell, just like the same era demanded, because the audience that needed to feel her music before they saw her was black. Her 1980 follow-up, Irons in the Fire, pushed further into funk and R&B with Rick James producing and writing alongside her. The album went gold, but it was still a niche success, not the crossover moment the label wanted. Then the sampling era arrived. Tina Marie's catalog, particularly the textures, synth lines, and vocal arrangements across her early Motown albums, became beloved source material for Quiet Storm and neo-soul producers. Her 1984 single, Lover Girl, reached the top 5 on the Hot 100. But it was her early work, the records people slept on, that kept paying licensing fees into the 2000s. Tina Marie died on December 26, 2010.
Just as well as king.
She was 54 years old. Her family called her loss sudden and unexpected. She had spent her career fighting to be seen as a soul artist, not a crossover novelty, not a white woman doing R&B, just a musician who made music that was real. The sample receipts proved she was right. Number 9. Cheryl Lynn, Got to Be Real, 1978. She won a talent competition on The Gong Show in 1976, walked on stage, sang, and the judges gave her a perfect score. 2 years later, she signed to Columbia Records and released her debut album. The single Got to Be Real hit number 12 on the pop chart and number 1 on the R&B chart. Everything pointed to a massive career. Then it didn't happen. The albums that followed didn't connect the same way. The label lost interest. Cheryl Lynn kept recording, kept making genuinely good music, but the commercial breakthrough never came again. Got to Be Real became a staple on oldies stations and TV shows. Everybody knew it. Nobody thought about the album behind it. Then hip-hop producers started listening more carefully. Got to Be Real was sampled by Will Smith for Miami. It powered dozens of other productions across the 1990s and 2000s. The warm, bouncing joy of that record, recorded in 1978 by a woman who came up through a game show, became one of the signature grooves of the West Coast summer sound. The album sold modestly. The single lived forever. And every time it played in a sample, in a remix, in a DJ set, Cheryl Lynn got a check. Number 10. The Whispers. Whisper in Your Ear. 1981. They had been recording since 1963. By 1981, they were veterans of the soul scene, respected, consistent, and thoroughly underestimated. Whisper in Your Ear was their 9th studio album. It contained a track called And the Beat Goes On, which had actually been released as a single in 1979 and reached number 19 on the pop chart. But the album itself and the track's life beyond that initial run was modest at best. Then Will Smith happened. In 1998, Will Smith released Miami. He built the entire song around the groove of And the Beat Goes On, its guitar riff, its rhythm pattern, its feel. Miami reached number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 and introduced a whole new generation to the Whispers sound. And that wasn't the only hit built on their catalog. The Whispers' work has been sampled by artists including Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Jay-Z, Missy Elliott, and dozens of others across 3 decades of hip-hop production. An album from 1981 that most people couldn't name is embedded in the DNA of records that billions of people know by heart. Number 11. Roger. The Many Facets of Roger. 1981. This is the solo album from Roger Troutman, the same genius behind Zapp, and it is worth its own separate entry. Because while the Zapp debut album gave hip-hop its bass lines, The Many Facets of Roger gave hip-hop its voice, literally. The talk box, the robotic warble, the machine-human hybrid sound that would go on to define West Coast hip-hop, T-Pain's entire career. The vocoder renaissance of the 2000s, it all traces back to this album. Released in 1981, it went platinum on the strength of a number 1 R&B cover of Marvin Gaye's I Heard It Through the Grapevine. But it was the instrumental textures, the synth patches, the processed vocals, the electro-funk architecture that producers kept returning to. Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, Eazy-E. All of them built records from Roger Troutman's sonic vocabulary. And then in 1995, Tupac called Roger directly. He wanted the real thing, not just the sample. He wanted Roger's hands on the talk box. Roger showed up to the studio and played live. California Love went to number 1. The Many Facets of Roger sold 1 million copies in 1981 and then was mostly forgotten. The talkbox sound it pioneered is still being used in music made today. Number 12. Syl Johnson. Is It Because I'm Black? 1969. We come back to Syl Johnson because one album wasn't enough to contain what he gave hip-hop. Is It Because I'm Black was his second album. Released in 1969, inspired directly by the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The title track climbed to number 11 on the R&B chart, but the album was too politically charged, too raw, too real for mainstream radio to embrace fully. It sold modestly. Then the decade moved on, and Syl Johnson was left in Chicago with an album full of important music and no platform large enough to hold it. Then hip-hop found it. The textures, the horn arrangements, the drum patterns buried inside that 1969 record became source material for some of the most politically charged rap music ever made. Public Enemy and Building Fight the Power
Keep on holding on. Keep on.
and Fear of a Black Planet used Syl Johnson as one of their foundational audio references. Chuck D later described the connection between Johnson's music and the sonic architecture of Public Enemy's most important records. An album about racial injustice in 1969 powered the soundtrack of Racial Reckoning in 1989, 20 years apart.
You see, I heard somebody say,
The same truth, the same groove, the same man sitting in a house in Chicago, waiting for the world to catch up. I rate right at the top, Syl Johnson once said, though I've been underrated all my life. He was right. He always was.
so hard. We're trying so